taught.
Now, okay, I want to stand this thing with future, past, and all of that, because I understand that if I sit down here and I go through the remote viewing process, and I describe some scene, some building, some bridge, some water, some circumstance, some event on the other side of the world, somebody could be on the other side of the world and can verify the accuracy or inaccuracy of what I have described. When you I hear what you say. Now, I hear what you say, however, about, you conducted this experiment with the future, and a month or so in the future, and then a month later, circumstances occurred just the way they had been described, and that also is a form of verification. But when you talk about the distant past or the distant future, I have to ask the question, as a journalist, how do you know if you have accurately viewed something remotely if you're going through time?
Well, the viewers that I work with, I'm the scientist who works with these viewers, but the viewers that I work with have typically been trained in these procedures for a decade or more, and they're really good. They produce really good data. So when they are being tasked under totally blind conditions for remote viewing a target that may be in the distant past, anywhere in the distant past, the descriptions are not at all ambiguous. There's no ambiguity about what is actually being described. For example, we had a project which may interest some of your listeners in dealing with post-2012 Earth changes. It was originally designed as a climate project that was designed to test if remote viewing could be used to discern small levels of climate change, a little bit rise in sea level, perhaps a little less snow on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, and so on. But what it found between the years 2008 and 2013, June 1st, 2013, was enormous Earth changes. And so we're actually in the middle of that project right now, looking into the future. But when we do things like that are in the past, there is no qualitative difference in the actual experience. And the data are, really easy to describe.
It's my understanding from my producer that it's one of your experiments or one of your remote viewing processes, but somewhere somebody came out and said that we viewed the past and the crucifixion never happened the way we were told it happened. Now, I have to tell you, when I first hear something like that, I don't want to believe it. Okay, it flies in the face of faith, and I know of no way to verify such a statement. I know of no empirical evidence that could one way or another verify it. So essentially, I come away from that thinking that I have to either take on faith that it did happen or take on faith that it didn't happen, but there doesn't seem to be any way to scientifically emphasize or scientifically prove one way or the other that such a remote viewing vision is accurate. What do you say to that?
Well, this was a project that I did independently of the Farsight Institute with one of the world's greatest, best remote viewers, Daz Smith, he works in Britain. He uses the CRV methodology, and the project is independent because the board of directors, I am, of course, the director of the Farsight Institute, but we have a board of directors, and they voted unanimously with me that the project was just too controversial to be included as an official project of the Farsight Institute. So I released it as an independent project just in order to get the data out. But the very fact that we can use the human nervous system to accurately remote view the past, the present, and the future, and that this is a science which is become increasingly recognized as a real phenomenon and a real science, means that there will be an ability in the near future for, and I'm not talking about tomorrow, but within some years, to use technology to duplicate the same thing. So we're talking about a major change in the understanding of physics and the laws of physics for this technology to occur, but the fact that we know that it can happen means that technology will be available at some point, and the verification of that project will be possible. The project was called the Crucifixion Ruse, and it has its own website, which is not part of the Far Sight Institute, and that is www.crucifixionruse.com. And there's a DVD that presents all of the data and explains the whole story. What I did was using a variety of different targets in which the remote viewer did everything blind. He had never done anything esoteric like this from me. It was all, he had been involved, he has a tremendous track record of accuracy on science projects done at the Far Sight Institute using normal physical Earth targets, so he wasn't expecting anything like this. But it was inevitable that somebody would eventually point remote viewing in the direction of the crucifixion event because it's such an interesting historical event. Right or wrong, I believe it's correct without any doubt for my own self, and I come at this with a great deal of difficulty because I have been for many years the cantor at the Catholic Basilica here in Georgia, in Atlanta, and I have sung sacred music in many places, and I don't say this naturally, easily, but as a scientist, the remote viewing data are quite clear. The reality is, as I interpret these data, and I don't think there's any ambiguity in the data, and again, people can see the data and get the presentation at crucifixionruse.com. It's a DVD that's sold through Amazon and explains all of the information. The idea is that Jesus, in fact, according to my interpretation of these data, was actually a much bigger, better, smarter, cooler guy than anything any traditional religion gives. So they present him as sort of a stoic figure that died for your sins. But the situation was much more complicated according to my analysis of these very clear data. And the situation is that in the higher realms of existence, these dramatic battles between good and evil simply do not occur. And Jesus saw no need to go through such a painful and unnecessary event because there are no sins that we have to be forgiven for. Yet we were going to have this day of bloodletting no matter what. It's something that we needed to go through. And he let it happen and participated in it. Judas, on the other hand, according to these data, which are not at all ambiguous, Judas was one of Jesus' closest and most trusted companions. He helped orchestrate this ruse, and the idea was that they knew that the authorities were going to arrest and crucify Jesus soon, because that's what they did to people who amassed large followings in those days. And so they had another person who was a deluded, somewhat mentally ill follower of the throng who thought he was a Messiah. And they went to this guy, just a few of the disciples went to him and said, "You're right, you're the one. Would you like to go through this sacrifice to fulfill a biblical prophecy?" and so on. And the guy agreed. He was drugged so that he wouldn't feel much pain. This is why he didn't speak when people asked him questions. This is why he couldn't carry the cross. And it's also why Peter, who was not in on the conspiracy, denied him 3 times because he honestly didn't know that guy. And this person was led, the authorities were led to this person by Judas, who was sweating it out, because if he was discovered, then he would have been crucified as well. And he was led to this, they led the authorities to this person, and that's also why the body had to be gotten rid of within hours after the crucifixion, because that was the incriminating evidence that was going to resolve this. It made Jesus into a martyr, and it fundamentally changed the evolution of humanity on this planet, because we were a slave-bearing civilization. Everyone had slaves back in those days. The Greeks had slaves. The Romans had slaves. Go across the planet, the Aztecs, the Mayans, everyone had slaves. If you added 2,000 years to a slave-based organization, you would have had a complete collapse of the human experiment. But the message that God is love, love drives the energy of the universe, that fundamentally changed everything over the years, and it gave a nudge to our evolution as a society that we are benefiting from today. But I am certain that Jesus wanted this ruse to eventually come out. He had no alternative. There was going to be something like that no matter what he did. He simply allowed it to happen, and it caused a benefit.
Interesting. I'm not signing on, but I will check out that website, crucifixionruse.com. Very, very interesting. Now, it's my understanding that the U.S. and presumably other governments have used remote viewing for spying.
Yes.
Is it reliable enough to justify such use?
Absolutely. In fact, when you have physical spies, very often the information is incorrect. Remember the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That was the justification for the second invasion of Iraq. That was a huge piece of information, and it turned out to be totally false. So there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Very similarly, many times physical spies get it wrong. Remote viewing, when it's done by highly trained people under very controlled situations, can be extraordinarily accurate. But it's like playing the piano. There are very few really good world-class remote viewers because it takes so much effort, so much time, so much practice to master these procedures, to master the skills. If you want to go up to a piano and bang on it, you can make noise. But if you want to perform in Carnegie Hall as a world-class pianist, you're going to have to invest many years practicing and getting good at that. So talent is involved.
I can vouch for that. I was actually offered the opportunity to be trained by a professional concert pianist. I'm very good, but I knew that in order to actually do that, I would have to give up everything else I was doing in life and devote myself exclusively to that, and I just wasn't willing to do that. But the fact that it was offered to me was quite a coup by itself, so I understand what you're saying.
Now, for those people in your audience who may be interested in what we do, the projects that we do, that would actually be very useful and interesting. For example, when people come to our website at farsight.org, we are the only science shop anywhere that offers full-blown science studies with all data, all documentation, and sometimes people are a bit overwhelmed with how much we offer on the website, just clicking around. But to solve that problem, we came out with a DVD called The Far Sight Experiments, Volume 1, and that is the place to go to get everything sort of explained with a nice presentation that ties 4 of our major projects together, done over the last 5 years, and pulls them all together. And those 4 projects are, interestingly, the issue of whether we have multiple realities. There is an operational high-tech base on Mars. This is not a new agey fuzzy thing, but a very clear NASA JPL Malin Space Science Systems photograph of a nozzle, a spray coming out of the nozzle, horizontally placed, shadow under the spray, a pipeline leading to domes, and we sent the viewers to that under totally blind conditions. They replicated everything that was in the very clear photograph, and then, doing what they normally do, they saw the domes, they went into the domes. So this is not something where someone says there's bases on Mars. It's an exact position saying that is it, that's the photograph, and this is what's in there. So we have that as a project. We also did a project on the planet, believe it or not, that used to exist between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter that exploded, confirming a theory that was developed by the now late astronomer, very mainstream, Thomas Van Flandern, who was the head of his Department of Celestial Mechanics at the Naval Observatory, where he described how the planetary data clearly support unambiguously the idea that a planet exploded for reasons at that time unknown between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, creating the asteroid belt and essentially creating a very bad day for Mars. And so that is another project. We also did a project on the post-2012 Earth changes, which are the only hard data that exists anywhere, done under total perfect scientific controls with perfect randomization of events that are perceived in the near future prior to June 1st, 2013. And all of that tied together is included in the Farsight Experiments DVD. The Earth changes are enormous and astounding. We were expecting small little climate differences. We got unbelievable changes. I never believed the Mayan calendar stuff, ever. But this...
And there's a lot to be said. Did you touch on anything having to do with the Nostradamus prediction that at the end of this year, the sun is supposed to come into alignment with the center of the Milky Way galaxy, and that's supposed to bear into the climate changes and all that? Did that fall into play in your 2012?
I've never been a follower of Nostradamus or the Mayan calendar, and I still am not. However, the results that we see are compatible with the most dramatic of results that are described by that type of sources like Nostradamus and elsewhere. So at this point, I am simply saying I don't know. But I do know that the data that we have are absolutely unambiguous, and they are huge.
Is it possible that Nostradamus might have been a remote viewer?
Yes, in fact, that's most likely what would have happened. He was a primitive remote viewer, and he put his perceptions into these quatrains, and we try to figure these things out. We are much more advanced than that now, and we don't need quatrains, and we are very unambiguous with respect to the way we describe these remote viewing findings. So, yes.
Can anyone... We're almost out of time, but can anyone learn to remote view? Does it require special skills? Someone really wants to learn.
Well, look, as a pianist, you know that talent does play a part. However, you also know that anyone, if they practice long enough, can play the piano really well. So it's like that. Yes, talent is useful, but anyone can play the piano if they practice long and hard at it. Similarly with remote viewing, we even offer a free free YouTube-hosted course, 18 hours, 24 lessons, plus a free printable text on procedures for remote viewing on the site.
This is all accessible through farsight.org, correct? We're just about out of time.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, let me give that out. www.farsight.org. That's the website, FARSIGHT.org. We'll have that and the Crucifixion and Dr. Brown personal websites on the links page at Global Freedom Report. Dr. Courtney Brown, it has been fascinating. I think I'd like to have you back because there's not enough time to go through everything I wanted to go through. Thanks so much, and God bless you in the work you're doing.
God bless you, Brent, and thank you for inviting me.